On July 22nd, 2025, the world stood still as Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary Prince of Darkness, passed away at the age of 6. After years of grueling battles with Parkinson's disease, Azie's story became one of defiance, survival, and the kind of pain that only someone who's lived through it all can understand. These past 4 years have been sheer hell for me, he confessed. A man who had once stared into the abyss and kept walking now fought to keep standing, only to be brought low by time itself. But behind the rock legend, there was more than just fame. There was a man, a broken boy, who learned the hard way that life, no matter how dark, was still worth fighting for. Before the world knew him as the Prince of Darkness, Azie Osborne was just a boy from the tough, grim streets of Aston, Birmingham. Born John Michael Osborne in 1948, his early years were shaped not by dreams of fame, but by the harshness of survival. In a cramped, cold home, Azie grew up alongside 5 siblings, all of them trying to make sense of a world that seemed determined to knock them down. His parents, worn thin from factory labor, were too exhausted to offer affection or understanding. His father believed emotions were a sign of weakness, and his mother, too, drained from endless hours on the assembly line, had little energy left for anything beyond the basic. Love and tenderness were luxuries they couldn't afford. From the very beginning, Azie wasn't the golden child. He wasn't the clever one, nor the charming one. He was the invisible child, the one who blended into the wallpaper, unnoticed and neglected. While his siblings had their own ways of dealing with life's difficulties, Azie had none. He was the quiet one, the one who suffered in silence, never drawing attention to his pain. But even silence can be loud when it surrounds you every day. At school, things didn't get any better. Azie struggled with dyslexia, but in the 1950s, this wasn't understood the way it is today. Instead of receiving help, he was labeled as stupid, hopeless, and worthless. The letters in his textbooks danced before his eyes, mocking him with every turn. The teasing from classmates wasn't just cruel words shouted across the playground. It was fists in the hallway, knees to the stomach, and bloodied lips behind buildings with no adults around to intervene. He was made to feel like less than nothing, an invisible boy who didn't even have the right to defend himself. But the real battle was at home. Azie's father, who believed in tough love, saw his son's sensitivity as a problem to be punished, not nurtured. On one occasion, Azie came home in tears after being bullied at school, and instead of comfort, he found his father's wrath. His father took out his belt and lashed out, telling him that weakness wasn't tolerated. It wasn't just physical pain Azie endured, it was emotional abandonment. The message was clear: pain didn't earn sympathy, it earned punishment. And so Azie learned to wear his pain like armor, hiding behind it as best he could. But armor doesn't heal wounds, and Azie's wounds were deep. By the time he turned 14, that silent armor became unbearable. One night, in the quiet of his small bedroom, Azie couldn't take it anymore. He tied a rope using his mother's washing line, climbed onto a chair, and waited for the world to let go of him. But fate, cruel and unrelenting, had other plans. His father burst in and yanked him down, but instead of offering comfort, he beat him again, as though violence could banish the pain. It wasn't mercy that saved Azie that night, it was rage. Something inside Azie broke, or perhaps it was something that finally hardened. He stopped caring about school, stopped speaking unless absolutely necessary. The boy who once had dreams became a shell of himself, drifting through adolescence with a blank stare, disconnected from everything around him. At 15, Azie dropped out of school. There was no ceremony, no grand moment of rebellion. It was simply the natural outcome of a life lived in chaos. With no qualifications, no purpose, and no plan, he wandered into a series of dead-end jobs. He worked at a slaughterhouse, on construction sites, and in factories tuning car horns, but none of it mattered. He was too distracted, too awkward, and too broken for any of it to last. He was fired from job after job, each one reinforcing the belief that he was nothing, just a nameless face lost in the crowd. By 17, Azie was living in a constant state of hunger, real hunger, not the metaphorical kind. His shoes were falling apart, his shirts were held together by thread, and his hope was crumpled into a ball he no longer bothered to hold. Every day was a struggle, not just for survival, but for any reason to keep going. When desperation hit, it didn't whisper, it screamed. In 1965, Azie tried to change his luck with a botched burglary. The crime was more out of desperation than malice. but it landed him in Winston Green Prison. There, reality hit him with a brutal force. Prison was its own kind of hell, but it was in that dark, confined place where something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a radio crackled with the sound of She Loves You by the Beatles. That song, that moment, sparked something in Ozzy, a feeling he hadn't had in years. For the first time, he didn't want to disappear. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to be heard. He wanted to live out loud. That moment changed me, he later said. It didn't take away the bruises or the fear, but it gave him a vision. Ozzy realized that music could be his escape. He didn't know how to play anything, but he knew he had to be on stage. He had to scream. And so the boy who once begged the world to let him go made a vow. He wouldn't die forgotten in Birmingham. He would be loud. He would be terrifying. He would be unforgettable. Ozzy Osbourne's early life wasn't just a series of painful events. It was the forging of a man who would one day rise from the ashes of despair and change the world. The same boy who had been beaten, broken, and abandoned would soon become the very thing that the world feared and loved. Ozzy Osbourne's life could have easily been lost to the overwhelming darkness that surrounded him, but something extraordinary happened during one of his lowest moments, something that would set the course for his destiny. At 14, he had reached the brink of despair. The weight of his troubled home life, the relentless bullying at school, and his own inner turmoil had pushed him to the edge. One night, in the quiet solitude of his room, he took a step that many can never undo. Using his mother's washing line, he tied a rope and climbed onto a chair, preparing to end it all. He had convinced himself that there was no way out of the pain, but fate, as always, intervened with a brutality that was strangely fitting for Ozzy's life. His father burst into the room, not with mercy, but with anger. He yanked Ozzy down from the chair and, without a word, beat him with the same belt he had used countless times before. But this time, there was something different about Ozzy. Something inside him cracked, but it didn't break. It hardened. Ozzy didn't cry out for sympathy. He simply went numb. He stopped fighting for anything. For the rest of his teenage years, he would drift aimlessly through life, no longer looking for a reason to live, but simply surviving each day in the hope that one might bring him something better. That is until 1965, when Ozzy found himself behind bars at Winston Green Prison. It was in this suffocating, soul-crushing environment that he was truly forced to confront his brokenness. He wasn't in prison for a crime he had committed out of malice, but for a desperate act of survival, a botched burglary that was born from a need to escape the crushing poverty and hopelessness he had endured. Yet prison was no sanctuary. It was just another cage, another place where the world had given up on him. But even there, in the bowels of that dark place, something changed. One afternoon, as Ozzy sat in his cell, the crackling sound of a radio filled the room. The song that played wasn't a ballad of hope, nor was it a song of rebellion. It was She Loves You by the Beatles. To some, it may have seemed like just another song, a popular hit in the middle of a lifetime of struggles. But to Ozzy, it was nothing less than a bolt of lightning. That moment changed me, he would later admit, the words hanging heavy with the weight of their meaning. It wasn't just the music. It was the realization that something in him had been awakened. For the first time in a long while, Ozzy didn't want to disappear. He didn't want to just give up and fade away. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to be heard. Music, for the first time in his life, became his reason to keep going. The rawness, the energy, the loudness, everything about rock music spoke to the chaos and pain inside him. This wasn't about finding an escape. It was about finding a purpose. Ozzy didn't know how to play any instruments, but in that moment, he made a vow to himself. He would scream, not in frustration, but in defiance. His music wouldn't be pretty, it wouldn't be polished, it would be raw, brutal, and loud. Louder than the silence that had plagued him for so long, louder than the darkness he had tried to escape, louder than the pain that still clung to his every breath. That vow, that moment of clarity, set the course for everything that was to come. Ozzy wasn't just inspired by the music, he was inspired by the idea that it could be his salvation. The boy who had been invisible for so long, the boy who had been told he was worthless, stupid, and unimportant, now saw the potential for something bigger, not just for fame or success, but for something deeper. Music could be his voice, his scream, the sound that rose above the noise of his troubled past and stood as proof that he was still here. But behind the scenes, the man who had once lived life in the fast lane was living in the aftermath of years of physical wear and emotional pain. Despite the fame, despite the love from his family and fans, Azie's health issues were escalating. His joints stiffened, his reflexes slowed, and the life he had lived as a larger-than-life figure now felt like a distant memory. Then came the crushing blow. On December 8, 2003, during a casual ride on his quad bike across his estate, Azie suffered a horrific accident. Losing control of the vehicle, he was violently thrown to the ground. The injuries were devastating: shattered collarbone, broken ribs, crushed vertebrae, and collapsed lungs. For 8 days, Azie was in a coma, fighting for his life. The world held its breath. Would this be the moment the curtain finally fell on the Prince of Darkness? But Ozzy Osbourne was nothing if not a fighter. He defied all odds once again and pulled through. The accident left scars that no amount of surgery or time could heal. Chronic pain became his constant companion. The physical toll of his life was finally catching up with him. But still, Ozzy kept going. Even in his weakened state, he managed to take the stage again, his resilience and inspiration to everyone who had ever followed his career. The hardest blow came in the 2010s when Ozzy was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a disease that slowly but surely took away his ability to control his body, leaving him frail and vulnerable. In his final years, Ozzy's once unshakable presence was diminished by the tremors that coursed through his body. His ability to perform, to command the stage the way he had for decades, was no longer possible. Yet in the face of this, Ozzy continued to create. In 2020, despite his physical decline, he released Ordinary Man, an album that was as raw and defiant as any he had ever made. It wasn't about reliving past glory. It was about proving that even in the face of relentless decline, he still had something to say. The album was a declaration he wasn't done yet. He didn't hide his illness. He spoke candidly about the pain, the fear, the vulnerability. These past few years have been sheer misery, he said in interviews, his voice heavy with the weight of truth. Parkinson's had stolen so much from him: his mobility, his voice, his ability to do the thing he loved most. But it didn't steal his spirit. Despite the tremors in his hands and the weakness in his legs, Ozzy kept going. Every song he wrote, every note he sang, was a rebellion against a fate he never asked for. It was survival turned into music. In 2025, as Ozzy's health continued to decline, he made the decision to do something he had never imagined. He gave his final performance. It was less about the music and more about the meaning behind it. On July 5th, 2025, Ozzy appeared on stage in Birmingham, surrounded by the original members of Black Sabbath. The arena was packed with over 40,000 fans, with millions more watching from around the world. But this wasn't just another performance. It was a farewell, a moment of reverence. Ozzy, frail and leaning on a cane, stepped onto the stage, and the crowd fell silent. They weren't just waiting for the music to start. They were paying their respects. The man who had given them everything, who had made them feel seen, heard, and understood. When Ozzy whispered, "This may well be the last time I ever stand on a stage," it wasn't with sorrow, but with finality. The show wasn't about pyrotechnics or grand theatrics. It was a quiet acknowledgement of a man who had lived an extraordinary life. And as the concert went on, Ozzy's voice cracked with age, but every note was imbued with memory. It was as if time itself was paying tribute to the man who had spent his entire life fighting against it. The concert wasn't just a final performance. Every dollar earned from the event of $190 million went to causes that mattered deeply to Ozzy. He donated the money to Parkinson's disease research, to the Birmingham Children's Hospital, and to other charities that had helped him along the way. Even in his final days, Ozzy was giving back, ensuring that his legacy would continue long after he was gone. It was a final vow that even in his physical decline, he would remain a force for good, for light, for change. When Ozzy Osbourne passed away on July 22, 2025, the world lost more than just a rock legend. They lost a symbol of resilience, defiance, and survival. Ozzy's life was never easy. He fought against forces, both external and internal, that sought to destroy him. And yet, in the end, it was his strength to keep going, to keep fighting, that defined him. He had outlasted the storms that had tried to drown him, and in doing so, he became more than just a rock star. He became a testament to the human spirit's ability to survive, to rise, and to leave behind something that echoes long after they're gone. In the final stretch of his life, Ozzy Osbourne proved that legends aren't made in the noise of stadiums or the lights of a stage. They are made in the quiet moments, in the struggle to keep going when the world would rather see you fall. Ozzy's legacy wasn't just in the music he created, it was in the way he lived, the way he loved, and the way he fought. His story is one of survival, and his music, his defiance, will continue to inspire those who feel like they have nothing left to give. Ozzy Osbourne may have left the stage, but his legacy, like his music, will never truly fade. It will live on in the hearts of those who remember the boy who screamed louder than his pain, who faced every obstacle with the ferocity of a warrior, and who in the end reminded us all that survival is not a chance, it's a choice. Ozzy Osbourne's life was one of constant battle, from his childhood struggles to the demons of fame, but through it all, he kept screaming, kept fighting, and in the silence that followed his passing, his legacy roared louder than ever. Rest now, Ozzy, you've earned this peace.